going to do is we have, as you know, 5 tables. There's 6 being accountants, you know there's 5. So what we're going to do is each moderator gives our 5 tables is going to come up here. What they're going to do, and what they're going to do is say, this is the question for my table. This is what I learned from my table. And then we're going to have a discussion for as long as it goes on. Then we're going to do tables 2, 3, 4, and 5 in that order. So, to start, we can start with Dr. Barbara Polko. And Barbara, let me pass.
Oh, good. So if you'd like to take some notes, there is a small quiz at the end of this. All right. So we entertained the question of sustainability reporting. And actually the question was written of sustainability or ESG reporting. What we have found at our university as we're moving away from using ESG because it's become such a politicalized topic. So we now represent sustainability as it in itself is a framework for discussion. So with that said, we discussed about how sustainability has been progressing. Is it working, which was the way that the question was originally phrased. And do we feel that it's moving at a pace or at a cadence that we're comfortable with? So that's what we started with, and it really went all over the place in terms of some of the feedback. So some of the things that were shared was the challenges of not having singular reporting guidelines. So we have guidelines in the United States. Recently it came from the SEC, and their enactments are primarily focusing on environmental disclosures associated with Scope 1 and Scope 2. Everybody was stunned that Scope 3 did not make it into the SEC. However, at the same time, we have the United States as a whole having regulation. Now you have California as a single state issuing their own bills for compliance if you operate in that state. And their requirements are far more expansive than what the SEC has asked. So you've already got complexities and you haven't even left the country. Now you move over to Europe and you have the European countries coming together with a very, very fast-paced approach on extremely extensive reporting requirements. Not only are they asking for reporting on activities, but they're also asking for reporting on the impacts of companies' activities. Organizations are moving at a rapid pace to try to fulfill these obligations that are coming on very, very quickly. And then you say, okay, you've got the United States, you've got Europe, there's a lot of other wonderful countries out there, many of you are from them, correct? And then you're likely looking at the ISSB, which now houses what is known as the SASB standards. So that's your landscape. You can also think about another reporting guideline called the GRI, Global Reporting Initiative, which is the oldest, over 25 years old, and that has been sort of the underpinning of the European guidelines. So that's a challenge in itself, correct? So if we stand back and we say, is ESG reporting, or as we say, is sustainability reporting and disclosures working? Well, it's happening, and that's a big deal. Some of the comments on our table were, is it accomplishing what it was set to accomplish? And then we had a nice conversation about, well, what was it really supposed to accomplish? Well, I think it is, one, supposed to raise the awareness of the activities being engaged in corporations, even in nonprofit organizations or other types of institutions. Yeah, so it is doing that. Is it accomplishing change? In some ways, yes, but at a pace that we feel comfortable with. Some of our friends, our new friends at the table were saying that we're still faced with some significant challenges in terms of global warming, environmental. Are we meeting the Paris Accord of 1.5, 2.0 global warming? Are we, in fact, achieving sustainable development goals? All of these things that have been introduced as part of this long and wide dialogue, are we matching them, are we meeting them? So those are some comments on that space. Other things that were discussed is the constant comparison to the discussion of sustainability reporting and financial reporting. And it's important to step back and say, one has been around for a century, one is about 20 minutes ready. And it's really hard to start to try to compare these types of reporting processes. They are not really comparable in so many different levels. Other things that were discussed as the type of data that comes out of sustainability types of disclosures. The individuals that provide that information don't have the same skill sets and are uncomfortable or not yet accustomed to reporting information in a way that can be audited or auditable. The impacts to small companies. When we think about sustainability reporting, we read articles and research papers that all talk about the Fortune 500, the Russell 1000. Well, we all recognize that that is not the most significant impact in terms of our global activities. Small businesses contribute more than half of all types of sustainability impact outcomes. And we're not seeing measurements. They don't have the infrastructure for that. Interoperability was discussed in terms of how it's important to consider how reporting can take place in one location and how it can apply to another. We spoke about sustainability reporting is changing the lens in which we review organizations. When you think of financial reporting, you think of a very short-term lens. When you think of sustainability reporting, you start to think of long-term value creation, which is important to consider as we start to evaluate the future of organizations. The more that we think of sustainability reporting and the information that comes out of it and how it drives resiliency, how it works to prevent collapses from poor governance, that is where we will ultimately see the success. Are we there yet? No, but we feel ultimately we are at least moving in a very good direction.
Thank you, Mark. So, questions? Any questions or any comments? Ian.
I take your point that this is a new venture, but I also noticed when SOX came in and we had a new audit report for internal controls, happened overnight.
Yes, but the auditing function was already in existence since 1933, the 1934 Exchange Act. So it was an extension of current compliance requirements.
So do we need a law to make this happen?
Well, we are experiencing regulation, so yes. I think that that's another a topic we discussed, that the voluntary element of sustainability reporting only was able to accomplish so much. But now that we are seeing regulation from many parts of the world, we're seeing a far more rapid change. So very good point.
Any other comments from the table?
Anyone from our table, did I miss anything? No, great.
No, you made us sound smarter.
So anything else on sustainability before we?
I thought Frank, you were going to pretend you were on my table if it didn't. At least that's what you said.
So the change to sustainability from ESG, right? Because politics.
Yes.
Does that broaden the reporting? So beyond what ESG was originally intended, or
No, I think that
give it more scope?
no, it's a very good point. I appreciate it. Sustainability is the framework in which ESG reports on. So there's simply the elements to it, the categories of it. But in referencing, we don't think of them differently in terms of how we capture them in terms of our curriculum, how we capture them in terms of our efforts. And we had done a review of our courses, how they list, the titles, and we have little by little over the last year pulled away from using ESG in the way we describe some of our activities. Kelly, would you agree we've done that pretty much in all the disciplines? I know you've done it in the accounting area.
Yeah, and thank you. And I think it's just because there started to be a negative connotation with the ESG, where sustainability we were able to tie more towards that long-term value and just the business being around in 5 to 10 years or whatever time frame you want to look at. So we made a conscious effort to focus more on the concept of sustainability within our curriculum and classes. But we still do talk about the environmental, social, and governance concepts of it. So it's still there.
We have a responsible business leadership center here at the university. It's called RBC. And we were at an event, myself and others, which was not a global event, especially a US event where deans came from all over. And some of them were sharing that when they were creating initiatives around, if I may use the word ESG or the initials ESG, and they used it to title centers, to title programs, and they regret it because they're trying to figure out how they're going to do this rebranding. And I was with a colleague from one of the other Jesuit schools, and he leaned over and he goes, I wish we had called ours like a responsible business center or a sustainability, institute, because now we're stuck with this ESG, and it's not representing what we were trying to accomplish, which is long-term value creation and considerations. Thank you, Cal.
Excellent, thank you. Anything else? One question, Peter. I'm not going to say anything this time, I'm just going to pass you the mic.
One question. Whatever happened to triple bottom line?
Triple bottom line exists if you consider the economic element of it. And that,
Why did the triple bottom line itself never go anywhere?
Well,
I mean, ESG, to my mind, was something that was a con game to get profit out of the issue of sustainability and what the heck's the other one? Senior moment.
no, but you got me a con game. So I was going to say the triple bottom line to me visually always represented the stool. That's how the visual image for the triple bottom line. I don't know about you, but I can't sit on a stool that long. I'm very uncomfortable. So if you think about this notion of the triple bottom line, you're looking at the economics element of it, and then you're now looking at the reporting structure of integrated reporting, which was a framework that was quite popular when it first came out about 15 years ago, and it talks about the 6 capitals, how they go into an organization, how they're transformed, how they come out. And integrated reporting has not been very popular because they are so different in metrics and concepts.
And they shouldn't be so
They
different.
shouldn't be integrated.
And they are because, frankly, the accounting profession dropped the ball in the 1990s, big time. I was working with I was here in the United States, but I was working on the triple bottom line issue with the Institute of Chartered Accountants in England and Wales. And there was a team that was working on this, and somebody somehow fired everybody in that team, and it ended. And to my mind, we are now, 30 years later, looking at doing something that we should have been doing 30 years ago. I am really old and I'm really angry about it.
Oh my God. But I would ask if you don't direct that directly at me. We're trying our best. I hope I needed to duck away from some of that, but no, it's fine. But thank you for sharing your anger and frustration. I think that being in the accounting profession, we often have that emotion pretty much every day, so I appreciate the context.
Angry from chipping Salisbury or something.
Oh, it's lovely.
So-
It's a pleasure to have you.
So thank you, Barbara. Thank you once again. So next up, we have David Freeman, who is part of our executive team and our chapter head for Washington, D.C.
Thank you, David. So our question was, what are the key similarities between the CPA and the Chartered Qualification? The consensus was that they both have accountant in their name, so that's it, I'm done, thank you. In fact, it was the other way, it was one of the key differences between the CA and the Chartered, the CPA qualification. So while Barbara was talking there, I was furiously trying to figure out how to summarize this, and I came up with a great one. So
wait a minute, that meant when I spoke, you weren't paying any attention.
I was multitasking. Okay. So let's start at the beginning with education. So the diversity of the chartered qualification is significant in the education front because the qualification attracts graduates with all sorts of degrees, whereas here the accounting profession is made up of people who have taken accounting degrees. And really, that's the only pathway as we speak today to becoming a CPA. And there is a diversity not only of degrees but of pathways for the chartered exam. When I was becoming a chartered accountant, I chose not to go to university and get a degree, and here I am. You know, that's not possible with the qualification, the CPA qualification. So there's the underlying education, which is very different, and then there's the examination. The examination for the chartered qualification is, well, I'm sure you all know, is fairly punishing. The CPA qualification is comparatively easier. I won't say simple, but it's easier. So the bar is a little bit lower for CPA candidates versus chartered ones, and then the experience that they get to qualification, which is very, very different. I mean, the chartered examination, and I don't need to tell you this, but it mixes work experience and study, whereas a CPA, you come out as a newly minted CPA and your work experience is comparatively negligible. So that's a big difference on that. And then once you've actually qualified, so those are the 3 E's. I came up with 3 C's for what happens once you've qualified. So firstly, career. I mean, if you did word association for a CPA in the United States, any member of the general public, what's the first word that they would respond with?
Tax.
Tax, right? Probably the second one is audit. And really that has compartmentalized the CPA qualification here. If you look at the number of CFOs that are CPAs, it's a lot less than chartered accountants being in financial executive leadership. So it comes to the second point, which really is compensation for CPAs is generally a lot lower, particularly in the early years, lower than it is for chartered accountants. And then the other thing about the CPA qualification is there's actually a lot of competition that candidates have. They have choices. They could go in law. I mean, law has a far bigger place in the accounting world here than it does in the chartered world. And then, finance is very attractive, far higher salaries than the accounting here. And of course, the other qualification that will take precedence and has more prestige is the MBA. And that's probably the better stepping stone if you want to go into financial management than the CPA exam. And there is a pipeline problem here. It's actually more to do with it's actually a demand side, but the supply side cannot keep up. You may have heard that there's actually a shortage, a decline in the number of CPAs. That's not factually correct. There is actually a slow growth, but that's the problem. It's slow growth. So you combine a career which is comparatively easy to get into, except you have to get 150 credits to do that, which is going to cost you an arm and a leg to do. And then you take these examinations. You don't get paid well. You're in a job that requires long hours. It requires travel. I mean, why would you choose to become a CPA unless you really had not much other choice? So there really are a lot of questions about I'll use the word sustainability of the CPA path in this country when it's just not attractive. I mean, there has to be some structural change to make it more attractive for young people to come into, not just graduates, but anyone else who wants to take an apprenticeship type route, like is accessible in many of our countries. So that's kind of just to summarize what our table came up with. I will take any questions. Peter, if you want to make a statement, that's fine. Questions?
Okay. Is this on? Can you hear me?
Yes.
So in the Irish Institute, we were recently asked to vote on whether we would merge with CPA Ireland. And it was a difficult decision because certainly when I was doing my articles, it was like, oh yeah, CPA is multiple choice exam. And it wasn't given much regard. And now we're faced as an institute looking at being merged altogether. And so we're all in the one pot now. And it looks like that will move forward as well. So I know it's just a different three-letter acronym, but what would you say if CPA and chartered accountants worldwide suddenly started to just merge into one group of so-called accountants?
Well, firstly, I don't think that there are structural reasons why I don't think that could happen. It would actually be a very, very interesting scenario. What would it mean to all of us? How would we feel as people in the profession? What would it do to our prospects? What would it do to our compensation? I don't have a good answer. There are 1.8 million chartered accountants and students. There are less CPAs in the world. So, you wouldn't think so from sitting here in the United States, but we're the dominant brand, just not in this country at the moment. And I can't see that changing in the foreseeable future because the institutes can't put in the resources that would be necessary to be able to grow this in a way that the US CPA profession is growing internationally and offering examination in multiple countries, that the charter ones more likely to end up in competition with one another in certain markets, which is regrettable. I would actually like to see, and one day I expect it more likely, that the chartered profession will merge in some global fashion, because there's so much alignment, there's so much cooperation that goes on between them now. I think that's a possibility, and certainly in the United Kingdom, where if you look at the United Kingdom from here, where the three institutes, it doesn't make sense for Little Britain to have three separate institutes. It's political. It doesn't make any sense. So that would be a good starting point. And with the other, 16 major institutes who do not have, quite frankly, most of them don't have the resources to be able to provide the sort of regulatory member service type capabilities that are necessary. I think there's a strong argument to be made in the same way as New Zealand and Australia merged. I think that's where we should be heading.
Great, thank you. With David Powell as the CEO.
Of course. Thank you, Declan. So, any other questions? We'll do one or two more questions, and we'll move on. Otherwise
It's not so much as a question as a comment. I think what helps the branding of the CA call it crazy is that it's like by royal charter as well. And in the countries where, for example, Australia, South Africa, New Zealand, England, that means something. It just means something to be affiliated with the crown. So I think that also adds an element to its branding. Yes.
When in a country that loves Downton Abbey, if someone understood, because then you've got to explain what chartered actually means, that it is a royal charter. Thank you, Queen Victoria. But whether anyone would regard that as important here in making a determination, you know, given the choice between a CPA and a chartered accountant, I'm not sure. But yeah, it's nice to have a royal chartered accountant.
One last question.
I have a question, I have a question and a comment. One question was related to the people that are coming into the chartered accountancy that you were speaking to about. Is the same concern around lack of availability or lack of interest, does it apply there too, or is it mainly related to CPAs where we're seeing the shortage?
So far as I'm aware, and I don't have any numbers to back this up, but I think the chartered qualification is very vibrant and attracting still a lot more students into it because there's certain prestige to it. There's good compensation, and it opens up paths to all sorts of career options as well. You're not just staying in practice. So I think there's just some fundamentals there compared to the CPA when there's too much competition for the CPA qualification here for it to be as vibrant as the chartered qualification.
The comment I was going to make is around, certainly I've gone through the Canadian process, and then I've also sat the reciprocity exams here in the US. And you know, it's like many years apart, but what I will say is that I think that was also more of a feeling that it was a profession. When I was in Canada, the celebration that goes along with just going through the process, getting your exams, the results, it was very different than when you go to a computer and you know, type it in and then you know, you get a letter in the mail telling you, okay, you're now a CPA. So there is a distinction there, and it's been interesting in a lot of, so to me that's more of a tone, but you see a lot of comments now around people speaking about, even in the CPA world, that this is a profession. Sometimes people call it an industry, which goes to that point you were talking about, right? Where people think of it as an industry similar to other industries. And there's a distinction. So you'll see even members of the SEC that are when they speak about this, they revert back to, and they make a point of saying, this is a noble profession, and reminding people that that is the case. So I think there's a lot in terms of that base that is just like rebuilding a lot of the stature that the profession enjoyed and I think could enjoy again.
Thank you. So time for us to move to our next session, although we're spending a bit long on the Q&A. Shane, you're up. Your topic and what your participants fed back.
Great, everybody hear me? Okay, good. So my question, the question that we answered, we dealt with our team was a question about the home institutes. So, yeah, what's the level of service from the home institutes for us as members here in the US, and what could the home institutes perhaps do a little bit differently to help us? So we had a wide range of discussion, and we had members obviously from Canada, from Australia, New Zealand, England, and Wales, and Ireland at the table. It was always a well-rounded discussion. The number one point that came out was really for the home institutes just to be aware that when they are over here, when the executives come over, you know, typically it's once or twice a year, there's typically some sort of major event for the members. It's just to ask them to sort of consider that the chartered accountant community over here is a community, right? CAW, people in this room, all of the members, it's a community of members. And it's not really, we don't think parochially, we don't think about our home institute in that sense. So it's just that the message for the home institutes to really, if they're going to have a large event, just try and invite all the CAW members here, if it's in New York, or if it's in DC, or in SoCal, or wherever it might be, just to be more cognizant of that. We coordinate as a community, more so than as individual institutes. So, and it's particularly, I think it is, many of the institutes have done a good job at that, to be very honest. I think one of our largest institutes hasn't. And I think it's important just to call it out that that's not the way we operate in this market, and we would like to see that to change. Okay, so that will be a welcome change. The second key point that came out, and I'll try and pick up some time here because I know we're running out of time, is just leverage social media more. So perhaps less of the email flow. You know, many members get obviously lots of emails from the home institutes. So maybe just more social media usage will be helpful. And particularly around events and stuff like that. You know, one of the questions was, can we have events there? And it might be more of a learning to be honest for CAW Network USA as much as the home institutes, but really trying to think about, should we have a calendarized set of events or networking events that are, it could be the first Tuesday of every quarter, or it could be, you know, the last Friday of every month, whatever it might be. Something that takes the thinking out of it in terms of the coordination and meetings and stuff like that. So that was just something to think about. The third topic was really just really a question about how interested, when you're overseas like we are, how interested really do you end up being about the domestic activities of our home institutes? And I think to be fair, most of us probably say, it's not that important domestically what's going on. However, I think there was more of a sense that we want to be kept informed. Was anything strategic, or particularly around the branding and the sort of future development of the profession? So those sort of topics certainly seem to be ones that would resonate perhaps with the membership over here, to make sure we're aware. And then there was just one final topic. It was really just about just a question, really a question, maybe not something we're looking for a direct answer on, but it came up actually in just one of the previous sessions that, we call ourselves chartered accountants. We all grew up as chartered accountants. We take a lot of pride in being chartered accountants. But the reality is that the brand chartered accountant is probably 100, 150 years old. And we think about all the technology, the digitalization that's going on, the AI transformation of business, and just asking ourselves that question. And I think the Home Institute leaders need to just reflect on it. Is chartered accountants the right brand for us looking forward, given all the digitalization? How do we encapsulate all those digital type skill sets, tech skill sets, data analysis, all those other skills? How do you encapsulate that into the brand? And is that messaging around, is it the branding, the naming itself, or is it the way the brand is supported in all the various markets? So it's not, we don't have an answer, we just put that out there as maybe a philosophical question. So I'll stop there, David.
Thank you, Shane. Any questions or comments? You don't have to have any, but if you got some, now's the time. Peter.
Your last point about sort of getting the brand so that it's ready for the future is what I heard in what you were saying.
Yeah.
And I would endorse that 1,000%. I think the foundation of chartered accountancy is absolutely superb. But I don't think we've done a very good job yet in articulating how we ought to be looking 10 years from now. I mean, I know what I'll be looking like 10 years from now, but that's another subject. But the foundation of chartered accountancy is really, really good. My dream, frankly, is that the sustainability dimension of our sort of framing of our economy and the environmental dimension, those should be pulled in to the core of accountancy. I think that's where I would like to see our profession going.
Yeah.
We have got such a wonderful foundation, and yet we are limiting ourselves, in my view, to the most simple part and not the most important part. So anyway, that's my
Yeah, it's a very, very fair point, Peter. Very fair.
Anything else? In that case, thank you. I'll wait a second. David Freeman's put his hand up. That means that half a question or a whole question?
Just a very quick comment.
Which is, looking forward, the impact of artificial intelligence. I mean, we're ignoring Ireland, who have the 3 letters that we would all want in the name of an institute that's focused on artificial intelligence, CAI.
Thank you, David. Okay. So, Shane, thank you. And next up we have our secretary, Ross.
That's not CIA.
So, Ross, your topic and what's your week's
Hi, everyone. You know what the average age of an American is? Anyone want to guess?
40.
Or real life.
40.
Yeah, 38.5.
The average age.
The average age of an American is 38.5. And so when we went from 2020 to 2022, we dropped 1.4 million students. And over the 10 years to 2022, we lost 2.6 million students. In fact, graduating students in 2025, there'll be 3.93 million students graduating. That's going to be the highest point for the rest of eternity. So in education, we're all getting scared. We're kind of like, how do we get more students? And there's been a lot of political things within this country as well, and the cost of student education that started to put, I think, kids off that. And one of the things that our table was looking at was, what are we going to do for accountants, and how can we encourage more accountants into the profession? So we had a little bit of a chat on what we can do to try to lift that up. Not all is lost. I think you'll find that young people are pretty strategic anyway, and they're starting to know that. But there are some perceptions that we have within accounting. So chartered accountants contributed on this one rather than CPAs, but there's perhaps a little bit of lessons for CPAs to learn about that. So Ian made a comment that people like to major in finance because finance is considered as sexy and accounting is seen as boring. And it's interesting because I've got a bit of a research project going at the moment as well to ask people what's the first three words you think of when you hear of finance, and the first 3 words you think of when you hear of accounting. I haven't been able to get a lot of people to do it, but I did speak to a father and he said accounting's boring. I tell my kid to go and do engineering. But that finance is fun. Really? I don't think so. But anyway, that's me. Accountants in the US have also been perceived as more of tax people and bean counters. And when comparing the table's belief was comparing CAs to CPAs, the CAs were more principles-based, where CPAs were much more of a box-checking sort of process, so that it sort of loses its appeal with students there. The other things, hang on, sorry, I'm going blind in my old age, over 38. It's also seen as a very difficult course, and I get that perception from students that I teach. And then you've then got to go and do another qualification, and that next qualification step up. But if you go into a financial services company, you were saying, that they've got other qualifications that they need. As management, you would need a project management qualification. So I think we could sort of argue that with students. There's also a perception with students that the money, it's not even just for students, it's true, the money is poor in accounting. And people see that if they go into finance, they believe that they're going to get much more and possibly make millions per year. Peter made a very good point, and I think that this is appealing to students, that we want to see more of the social impact of business and the social damage that's caused by business, and that this would encourage more young people to do accounting, and I think that is something that I'm picking up from young people. Also, Sophie had said that young people don't know what accountants actually do, and that's really up to us as a profession then to get in there and do more mentoring with students, talking about our experiences and our career trajectories, something that we've been working on a little bit lately with NCAW Network USA. Peter had said that there's been a dumbing down of accountants and we haven't actually celebrated their value. So the Chartered Accountant program is an incredible program that gets to the guts of what this is all about, but the CPA doesn't quite get there, and they've somewhat backpedaled on their responsibilities there. Really gave CPAs a hard time, didn't we? Mentorship was another one, giving trainees the opportunities then to connect with somebody who is already a CA or a CPA. There is some really good programs on that, and you'll probably find them in your own areas. I know there's one here in New York as well for the junior achievement. And so if you get a chance to do volunteering with schools with junior achievement, they've got a really good financial literacy program that you can go into the schools as a chartered accountant and work with the teacher and talk to students about, just basic personal finance, because that exposure to personal finance when they're young is really beneficial for them to actually understand what an accountant is and what an accountant does. Offer a program that's a voluntary sign-up. This is Sophie's idea, wasn't it? To give a presentation to students, and even perhaps have the students give the presentation to the firm so you can adopt a student. Bring back the apprenticeship articles model of the past. And then we always say get them young while they're at high school. And that's what we've covered. Has anybody else got any other thoughts?
Any questions or comments?
I think there's also the piece around very much, I think there's marketing, like you're saying, right? It's about building the awareness, but I think there's opportunities as well to have the students really get to how dynamic the work we do is, and the more we're using all these tools, and the more they can actually see them and experience them, to understand that it is a very dynamic and fascinating place to be, and it really sets you up for any role. That's where I know when I've spoken to people, and they'll start with that. They'll say, "Oh no, it's boring. It's just it's just bookkeeping," and then they'll take the accounting person. It's really difficult. And when I start to describe to them what life as a professional looks like and the opportunities you have to travel worldwide, you look at us all here, there's a lot there that I think people don't necessarily get that picture, and there's surely an opportunity. But I think playing up a lot of the technology, but also maybe as people qualify, really making it interesting for them. And so, yes, some of these tools that we've been talking about around AI give the opportunity to take what some may view as the drudgery out and make it more interesting, but every role is going to have bits of that. So I do think there's more awareness.
It's been a long-held perception. And then for travel, I think that's something that would be really interesting to kids. So if any of you actually want to do an interview with me, we are doing a bit of a series of interviewing young chartered accountants of, the places you'll go, the people you will see. That's something that can really appeal to young people.
I think I could probably yell. It's
And get your voice. So last question, if we need to move to the next section.
So when I think about choosing to be an accountant, I think the CA was great because I started in Sydney, I moved to London. When I moved to London, people instantly recognized that I had a certain level of competency and they want to hire you. And it just so happens that that took me to America. And I don't think if I'd chosen another career, it wouldn't have opened up in the same way. And that's what, to me, really makes me grateful to be a CA.
I'll concur with that, given that I started off in Swansea, moved to London, moved to Zurich, moved to Brussels, moved to Denver, moved to Boston. So yes, you can go places. So Ross, thank you for that. And I would also like to add, to Kelly out, I know a number of really good CPAs who do a lot of really good stuff. It's just that we're looking here at comparing, I guess, as you're starting out in the profession. So thank you for that. So our final segment before we go into our next speaker, who's eagerly awaiting his audience, Antje, over to you.
Good afternoon, everybody. So I'm Antje. I'm not a chartered accountant nor am I a CPA. So I was asked to moderate our table, and the question was, how will we integrate artificial intelligence, so AI, into the chartered accountancy profession now, in 5 years, and then in 10 years? And basically, we kind of discussed the fact that it is going to bring a huge amount of transformative changes, and it's already doing so. And it's going to really change the way that chartered accountancy profession is going to sort of look going forward. The first thing that we sort of discussed was the automation of routine tasks, which I think most of you are seeing something of already. So things like AI can automate repetitive tasks such as data entry, transaction processing, compliance checks, and so on. And so it'll take away quite a lot of the mundanity, perhaps, of the role. So it's allowing chartered accountants to focus on the more strategic aspects of the role. However, one of the people on our table was saying that's all well and fine, but it'll also perhaps mean that the younger chartered accountants coming through will miss out a great big chunk of the learning. And so how are we going to bridge that knowledge gap? So that was something that sort of we couldn't actually really answer. The other thing that we thought about was enhanced data analysis and decision making, and how AI would be able to analyse large data sets much more swiftly and be able to identify trends and patterns and anomalies that might have been missed actually by humans. And so that would enhance the ability of accountants to provide a much more sort of deep insight and make perhaps more informed decisions. And also we were talking about sort of fraud, detection and risk management, and there was a thought that perhaps AI systems might be able to monitor transactions more in real time. And so perhaps eventually we'd be able to sort of flag things like potential fraud. But again, it would probably need chartered accountants to actually teach the AI to sort of look for stuff like that. But then we sort of thought more about the role of the chartered accountant going forward, and actually yesterday we held a think tank, so a Global Future Leaders think tank, and Ross was there, as was Jessica and a couple of other people in the room. And we talk about the attractiveness of the profession, and that's fine, but if AI is going to do all these things, how are we going to reassure the next generation that actually it is worth going through the pain and the expense and the heartache of doing the chartered accountants exams if perhaps they don't have a purposeful job at the end of it? So then we were thinking about, well, what would chartered accountancy look like? And we sort of came up with the idea of it being a much more sort of strategic and advisory role. So as AI obviously handles a lot more of the routine and analytical tasks, we thought that sort of chartered accountants would transition to roles that sort of really emphasise strategic advisory, and they would focus then on interpreting AI-driven insights to gain or to guide really business strategies and decision making, for example. And of course, they will continue to be ethical guardians, because obviously AI will handle those sensitive financial data, but chartered accountants will play a really integral role in ensuring those ethical standards and data integrity are maintained and upheld. And they'll also oversee the ethical implementation of AI in financial processes. And I think that was something else that we also discussed a little bit more in depth, was the piece around trust and the fact that chartered accountants are seen as trusted in business and in wider society, and it'll be crucial to uphold that trust and make sure that AI is trained in a way that will mitigate any damage to reputation. The other thing that we sort of were thinking about was skills development, and it would be things around sort of the knowledge in AI ethics and data governance, regulatory compliance and so on. But then also we thought about the fact that chartered accountants must also then be seen as innovators and change makers. And they'll need to lead the adoption and integration of AI technologies within the organisations and drive innovation and manage change. And so, as a result of that, they'll help design and implement AI strategies that align with business goals. So then when you look at the Chartered Accountancy qualification, then it might need to evolve such that you're almost merging technology in with the CA, the existing Chartered Accountancy qualification, so that you have that well-rounded individual. And so, you know, skills in change management, project management, and also this really important grasp on emerging technologies would be key, we felt. But also then there is that piece around education and training. And so experienced chartered accountants, perhaps sort of our generation, would then be responsible for educating and training the next generation of accountants in using AI tools and adapting to sort of tech-driven environments. Even though they would probably be more au fait with it, it would be our generation probably that would need to train AI in the first place to ensure that it is capable of doing the job properly. And then obviously, you know, you would remain as risk and compliance experts. But also AI would introduce new types of risk, including cybersecurity threats. So chartered accountants would need to specialise in managing those risks and ensuring compliance with evolving regulation and so on. So, you know, there is that idea that you might need to sort of improve expertise in cybersecurity risk management and also evolve those regulatory frameworks and so on as well. So I think really, you know, we concluded that while AI will automate many traditional accounting tasks, chartered accountants will need to evolve in roles that sort of move more to strategic insight, ethical oversight, innovation, leadership and specialised expertise. And the only way that you can do that is really to embrace and learn the technological advancements and so on, because obviously AI is going to augment your landscape going forward. So that was pretty much it in a nutshell.
Thank you, Angie.
That was
a great setup for Daniel's presentation. It's just that Daniel isn't going next.
Sorry.
So we got a couple, any questions or thoughts? Take a couple before we move on.
This is sort of a general question for all the tables. The CPA exam has recently changed. And one of the papers now, there are 3 different tracks. So you could be a tax track, I think audit track, I've forgotten what the third one is. Technology. I don't believe that's happening with any of the chartered accountants. They still have an examination which is, you need to be a generalist, you need to know everything. I'm just wondering how people react to that change in the US and whether it should be reflected also in the CA world.
It should, and I think specialisation is coming. It's just going to take a while to get there. But I guess I'm going to answer that. So if you think about all our different institutes, they've all got different people focused on AI, right? We did a webinar on the 30th, which Chris participated in, and Janny, who isn't here today, on AI and accountants. And we had the head of technology from ICAEW participating. They have a task force that kicked off relatively recently that's focused on what does this mean for accountants. So it's happening. It's just I'm going to say what Chris says to it, and Chris knows what I'm going to say here. It's just not happening fast enough.
But should it be part of the basic examination or should it be a supplementary specialization?
Good question. Good question. I know what I think, but I mean, I'd love our institutes to answer that, but they're not here. So let's park that bit for now. But no, I think it's good because if our profession doesn't change, it will cease to exist in its current form. It will cease to exist. Right? Any thoughts, comments? Well, great, because we're on time to move on now. So next up, we're going to translate to Resilience Revisited. For those of you who were here last year, it's a different presentation.